There's a moment when a conflict stops being a headline and starts being history. We may be living in that moment right now. 3 weeks ago, the Persian Gulf, one of the most strategically vital stretches of water on Earth, became a war zone. Not because of a slow escalation, not because of a miscalculation at a border crossing, but because on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes deep inside Iran, targeting its nuclear facilities, its military infrastructure, and its leadership. The operation had a name: Epic Fury. Within hours, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was dead. What happened next is what we're still living through. To understand why the Gulf is burning, you have to understand what Iran actually is in this region, not just as a country, but as a network. For decades, Tehran built what analysts call an axis of resistance. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, militia forces in Iraq and Syria. These weren't just allies, they were instruments, pressure valves Tehran could open or close depending on what it needed. But the strikes of February 28th didn't just kill a leader. They targeted the heart of the Iranian regime, triggering a torrent of hundreds of retaliatory missiles and thousands of drones across the region. Encyclopedia Britannica Iran's answer wasn't surgical, it was seismic. Retaliatory strikes targeted U.S. embassies and military installations across the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Oman, and Jordan. Encyclopedia Britannica countries that had nothing to do with the attack, countries that had carefully maintained neutrality for years, suddenly found themselves inside a war they never asked to join. Here's the part that most people are missing. Iran's strategy wasn't random. Analysts say this approach aimed to create maximum discomfort for Iran's immediate neighbors, while also demonstrating that Tehran could shake the global economy and disrupt oil markets. CNBC. The logic was brutal but coherent. Make the Gulf states, countries with everything to lose, pressure Washington to stop. It's a strategy called horizontal escalation. Instead of fighting the U.S. directly in a war it can't win conventionally, Iran spreads the pain laterally, across borders, across economies, across shipping lanes. The disruption of oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes, quickly led to fuel shortages and rationing in parts of Asia, as well as a sharp spike in global oil prices. Encyclopedia Britannica. Oil prices surged above $100 a barrel. CBS News, as tankers came under fire and insurers refused to cover ships passing through the strait. Major shipping lines, Maersk, CMA, CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, stopped transits entirely. The world's most important energy corridor became, in effect, a no-go zone. This isn't just numbers on a trading screen. Hundreds of thousands of travelers were stranded across the Middle East as flights ground to a halt. Dubai International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, was damaged by drone strikes and temporarily closed. Encyclopedia Britannica families were separated. Workers couldn't get home. Tourists were stuck in hotels and cities where air raid sirens were going off. In Fujairah, a fire broke out at a major bunkering hub after debris from an intercepted drone fell on it. Al Jazeera. In Dubai, shrapnel from a downed Iranian drone struck the facade of a building on Sheikh Zayed Road, the beating heart of a city that had spent 20 years marketing itself as the world's most stable, glamorous, safe destination. At least 13 U.S. service members have been killed and approximately 140 wounded in strikes and related incidents across the region. AJC. These are real people, sons and daughters, people who woke up on February 27th not knowing the world was about to change, and still the strikes kept coming. Saudi Arabia's defense systems intercepted and destroyed 10 drones over Riyadh and its eastern region. Bahrain reported intercepting 125 missiles and 203 drones since the start of hostilities, attacks that killed 2 people in the kingdom and 24 others in neighboring Gulf nations. Euronews. Iran also turned its attention to the sea. A sea drone struck an oil tanker near a Kuwaiti port more than 800 kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz, causing an oil spill and representing a significant geographic expansion of the conflict. Wikipedia Iran wasn't just targeting military assets anymore. It was targeting the nervous system of the global economy. The Gulf states, for their part, found themselves in an impossible position. They didn't want this war. They had spent years building relationships with both the United States and Iran, walking a diplomatic tightrope that kept them prosperous and safe. Iran's attacks created what Gulf officials called a huge trust gap that will last for years, possibly a generation. CNBC, here is what this conflict has revealed, stripped of all the political noise. The architecture of Middle Eastern stability that has existed since the 1990s, built on American security guarantees, Gulf neutrality, and the careful management of Iran, has collapsed. Iran's decision to target the UAE, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf states will have far reaching consequences that will shape the region long after U.S. operations in Iran have concluded. Atlantic Council Iran gambled that it could pressure its neighbors into breaking with Washington. Instead, it may have permanently shattered its relationships with the countries it needs most. Even amid a public feud between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, the events of the opening days demonstrated that Gulf solidarity remains strong. Saudi Arabia and the UAE made it clear that Iranian attacks crossed a red line. Atlantic Council. For the first time in decades, every major player in the region, Arab states, Israel, NATO, the United States, is being forced to define exactly where they stand. There is no more middle ground. Zoom out for a moment, and the shape of this conflict becomes clearer. This is not simply a war between the United States and Iran. It is a reckoning over who controls the post-American Middle East. With Khamenei gone and Iran's missile capacity severely degraded, ballistic missile launch rates declined by roughly 90% from peak levels, with more than 300 Iranian ballistic missile launchers destroyed or disabled AJC. Iran as it existed is functionally over. What comes next is unknown, and that uncertainty is the most dangerous thing in the world right now. Wars have a way of being defined not by their beginning, but by what they leave behind. The Gulf that emerges from this conflict will look different from the one that existed on February 27th. The alliances, the trade routes, the political calculations, the sense of safety millions of people took for granted, all of it is being rewritten. History doesn't ask permission before it arrives. It simply walks through the door, and suddenly, everything that seemed permanent turns out to have been temporary. A nation that strikes to protect its future must reckon with the world it creates for others, because in war, every fire lit becomes someone else's darkness.